About 24 hours ago, I was at Ben Gurion Airport in Jerusalem. In between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And as I was sitting down to really enjoy kosher McDonald's, this young Orthodox boy come running out. We need a tenth for Minyan. Orthodox kid from Boca. And I hadn't davened yet, so, I said to him, "Do you have transliteration?" And he said, "No." I said, "I'll give it a shot. I'll give it a shot." So I walk in there. There's a little chapel, if you know Ben Gurion, where the big circle thing is, where you wait for your flights. And I walk in there, and there's all these ultra-Orthodox rabbis, the hats, the curls, everything. There's 9 of them, and I said, "Listen," and I've used this line before. Some of you may remember it. I used it at the Kotel and Slichot. If anyone has any questions, I'm a rabbi. So I was in Israel for 3 days, which is not ideal. The reason why was because some of you know this story and some of you don't, so I'm going to tell it quickly. But in September, about 3 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, I was so fed up with how poorly we were doing in terms of support for Israel in America. Americans were turning against Israel. Jews were turning against Israel. Everyone was turning against Israel, and I'd had it. So I'd called the consulate here in Miami and said, "I'd like to have a meeting with someone in the foreign ministry." And they said, "Okay." So they called, and they said, "Okay, you have a meeting." I said, "Great, I'll be there." I flew to Jerusalem, again, for 3 days. I walked into the foreign ministry. I figured I was meeting with the head of maintenance, but I didn't care. Whoever they put me with, I was going to take it. I ended up meeting with this wonderful woman who previously was posted as Israel's ambassador to Latvia. And I said to her, "We're getting killed in America. We've got to do something." She said, "No kidding, what do you want to do?" So I said to her, "Well, I can't do much, but I can get you, at least try, to get you the most influential Zionist rabbis in America to work directly with you to change the dialogue in America." And I told her some of the ideas that I had. She said, "Okay, you have an idea." So I flew back, and I started working with a variety of with Zionist organizations here in America, and we put together a list of 47 Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox rabbis who are the senior rabbis of the largest synagogues in their cities, of all the major cities in America. And I called each one of them, and I told them I needed them. And we've added 2 more, but at the time, 46 out of 47 said yes. So we were the ones, if you remember, there was a letter about Mamdani that the rabbis wrote that almost changed the election, but definitely changed the Jewish vote. And Cuomo mentioned the rabbi's letter in the debate, if you remember that. That letter was written here at Temple Beth Am. We started that letter, and in 24 hours, 650 rabbis signed it, and in a few days, 1,200 rabbis signed it. And we did eat into his lead a little bit, but we started too late. So the foreign ministry and the foreign minister invited us to our delegation of rabbis to go to meet for 2.5 days or 3 days in the foreign ministry over the last few days, and that's what we did. It was a tremendous group of rabbis. I got to meet with the foreign minister. If you follow me on social media, you saw. If you don't, and again, it really bothers me that we have more members of Temple than I have followers on social media, but I comb through and I see, well, who, that guy? I see he's on Instagram. Okay. But I've been posting some of the pictures, and we got to meet directly with the foreign minister, and we're starting to map out a strategy for how we're going to fight anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the United States, and how we're going to work together to do it. One of the meetings that we had during dinner, I invited a rabbi whose lectures I listen to every week. I've never met him before, but I've communicated with him on social media. Whenever I have a question, sometimes I send it to him and he sends me an answer. He's one of the most famous rabbis in the modern Orthodox world, and he's been living in Jerusalem since 1984. And I invited him to come speak to our group for dinner, just on a, sort of a shot in the dark, and he said yes. His name's Rabbi Ari Khan, and he was one of the youngest students of Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rav, who was one of the most famous rabbis of the 20th century and who was the main rabbi of Yeshiva University in New York. And as he was speaking, I asked him, when he was done, are we in a kol dodi dofek moment? What does that mean? It means that after the founding of the State of Israel, Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote a letter which was so long that it turned into a short book, 70 or so pages, in which he explains how if you looked at everything that happened over the 20th century, that it's the sound of God knocking on the door, and that there is divinity in the establishment of the State of Israel. And I asked him, are we living in one of those moments now since October 7th with everything that's happening? It seems like there are divine forces at play. And what he said to me is, you have to understand what's happening now is exactly what Rabbi Soloveitchik meant. I never thought about this. What he said was, Rabbi Soloveitchik meant, if we ever have our own State of Israel, then the world will judge the Jewish people solely by what happens in that state. That was the view in the 50s of Rabbi Soloveitchik, maybe even in the 40s. Now, you know, Herzl, the founder of Zionism, never thought that this was possible, because Herzl never imagined that once Israel was established, that any Jews would live anywhere else but Israel. Because he thought that all of the Jews of the diaspora would either be slaughtered or moved to Israel. He never imagined that there could be something like the American Jewish community, with so much influence, with so much ties to the community, and with so much history. Before Herzl, in 1948, though, rabbis had to give serious thought to Jewish leadership in the diaspora. And as I was putting this group together, I spent a lot of time over the last couple of months researching what our tradition says Jewish leaders should be in the diaspora. And I wanted to present a couple of these ideas to the rabbis who I met with over the last few days at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Two of the most profound ideas that I discovered both came from the same yeshiva, one of the most famous yeshivas, the yeshiva of Volozhin in Lithuania. And one of the most famous rabbis of the 19th century, a rabbi known as the Netziv, wrote that without Torah leadership, Jews living in the diaspora become lost and unanchored. If you're a Jew not living in a state of Jewish sovereignty, and you don't have Torah as your anchor, then your chances of not assimilating into the broader culture are really, really slim. And so for the Netziv, the idea of the rabbi and the Jewish leader in the diaspora was to inspire Jewish people with the discipline of Jewish morality. One of his students, who later would become the first chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Kook, he wrote that Jewish leadership is refined and made holy in exile. Think about this. When you're a Jewish leader not living in Israel, you can dream about what it would be like if you did live in Israel. But when you're a Jewish leader living in Israel, you got to make sure that the buses run on time, that people pay their taxes, that you have an army to defend yourself, that you have a government, that you have police, and you're so worried about making the state run that you don't have time necessarily to dream about how refined and how divine a Jewish state could be. I mean, think about Moses. In this week's Torah portion called Bo, Moses leads the Jewish people out of Egypt and into the wilderness. But Moses was a diaspora leader. We know that Moses never set foot his entire life in the land of Israel. And what does he do as soon as he leaves Egypt? He immediately begins mishpatim, setting up laws, because he knows that if the Jewish people don't have ethical standards in the diaspora, they'll stray away and they'll be gone, and that will be the end of this project called Torah and the Jewish people. It was those rules, those mishpatim, those ethical standards that held the Jews together as they wandered for 40 years before eventually they got to the land of Israel. And it's for this reason that the Torah was given not in Israel, not on Mount Zion, but on Mount Sinai, in the middle of nowhere in the Sinai Peninsula. Because there, before they get to the land of Israel, in the diaspora, outside of Israel, the Jews could think about what it means to live as a holy nation. And you know, when they finally do get to the border, there are two of the tribes who say, we don't want to go into the land of Israel. Who are they? Reuben and Gad, two of the 12 tribes. Why? Well, we often look at them and say, well, they were greedy and there was great land on the other side of the Jordan River and they didn't want to go into the land of Israel. But perhaps Reuben and Gad wanted to stay in the diaspora because they were continuing to refine their leadership skills. After all, both Reuben and Gad were both firstborn of 4 of the mothers, right? Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. They were both firstborn sons who had failed thus far at leadership. And so the point I'm making right now is that a lot of the leadership for what goes on in the land of Israel is better sometimes refined outside of the land of Israel. Israel must take care of itself. It must live according to Jewish values in a sovereign Jewish state. It's responsible, the government of Israel, to build the land of Israel, to live there and defend it. But the moral advocacy often comes from the diaspora. Those who refine their leadership based on the dream of what Israel could be. These are the heroes of Herzl, of Bialik, of Jabotinsky, who used to sit around and say, if we had a state for the Jews, imagine what it could be. So my plea to the rabbis who sat around the Ministry of Foreign Affairs over the last 3.5 days was stop listening to what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is saying and criticizing their efforts at diplomacy. Do you not see that they're fighting a 7-front war for their survival? They're busy. Are you really complaining to them as Iranian ballistic missiles are falling on their heads that they're not doing a good enough job protecting us over here? Is that really what you come here to tell them? My message to these rabbis was, let us worry about America. We are the Jewish leaders here. The Netziv wrote in the early 1800s, for it is impossible to lead a nation in exile in the same manner as one leads it in its own land. Leadership in exile requires greater wisdom and much patience. Did you grasp that? Let me say it one more time. It's impossible to lead a nation in exile in the same manner as one leads its own land. The government of Israel is busy. They're not responsible for leading the Jewish people in the United States. But Rav Kook said it even better. He wrote this: the exile refines the spirit of Israel. That's us, the exile. In the absence of political and material power, in exile, the spiritual leadership of the nation was built, a moral, inner, elevated leadership. Had there been no exile, political power might have corrupted the spirit. Exile is not the goal. But then Rav Kook concluded, exile is not the goal, but the leadership that ariseth within it is holy. I sat around for 3 days with some of the finest, most influential, Zionist, thoughtful, compassionate, kind, and dedicated rabbis in North America. And when I had my chance to say to them what we need to do, I told them that the foreign ministry has told us what they can do for us and what they can't do for us. And I also told them, who are you waiting for? No cavalry is coming to save the Jewish people if the rabbis, who are the moral authority in this nation, don't stand up together and say, we will take on Tucker Carlson, we will take on whoever stands against us, we will stand up for our people in this nation that has always stood by us. And then I said to them, it's time for us to say what Moses said in this week's Torah portion. We are now casting off the shackles that have enslaved us, and we are taking our destiny into our own hands. And that is what we are going to do. Amen.